Okay, so just last month I was presenting at the last SQL Saturday of that era, and now I'm honored to present at the first Data Saturday, and hopefully that will continue on with the help of the community. I believe many of you may have been attending previous SQL Saturdays and know about the past organization shut down and then bought by Redgate. Now, in between those two events, the community rose up and created this concept Data Saturday, which is an awesome concept. And luckily, there are some Italian guys who set this one up, and I'm thrilled to be here. I will be giving you a chance to switch rooms. This session will be live on datasets in Power BI. So if you're in the wrong room, then you have a chance to switch now. The agenda for the session is a little bit about who I am, then something about what will not be covered, some specs and limitations, and we will go through those very quickly. Onto a demo on Azure Analytics or Azure Analytics Services Diagnostics. Then we will go through how to push data with PowerShell to Power BI. And finally, we will see a third-party application pushing data into Power BI service. We'll have a quick roundup at the end, and questions, I'm happy to answer them during the session or at the end, whatever. If a question pops up during the session, that's perfectly okay. I think maybe Marco or Sergio will be monitoring the chat and raising any questions if I don't see it.
Yes, sure.
Good. So the next one is something that I usually ask the audience when I'm having a live session, and it's a bit difficult here on these web sessions, but this one is probably the only enterprise you will be seeing during this session. This is very hands-on, how to get stuff done, and not the corporate kind of angle to live data sets in Power BI. So that was just a heads up in the beginning. A little bit about me. My name is Jens. I live in Copenhagen, Denmark. I've been visiting Italy quite often. My family loves vacation there, usually around Venice if we can, but also Florence and that. We haven't been that far south yet, but we will at some point when this all goes away, all this Corona stuff. I have 3 kids and a wife. I work with Catman Solution, and I will have a little detail on that after. I tweet somewhat. I'm reachable at Twitter, at least. And my blog has been a bit lazy or silent lately. I'm trying to pick that up again. When I'm not doing anything techy, I roast my own coffee, and that's something that I enjoy very much. Otherwise, I'm looking into actually building stuff with my kids so they can see how mechanics work and hopefully get a treat at the end of that. So what does Catman Solution do? We primarily target FMCG sector businesses, so fast-moving consumer goods, but we span others as well. We focus on Power BI as the main tool for presenting data, do Power Platform as well as a whole. Currently, we're best in class locally in the Nordics because there are no real competitors as we see it. And we just did a survey of our customers, and they confirmed that belief. As you can see, the NPS score below, we rank pretty high. We do BI as a service, so our customers just send us the data and we crunch all the numbers in our ETL engine that we've developed over the last 20 years. We have currently updated it so that it's a native cloud solution backed by Azure SQL databases, Azure Analysis Services, and Power BI, and all kinds of other Azure stuff. We have integration with external tools for product master data and so on. So we have a decent solution to offer to any companies out there. So what do I do in Catman Solution? I'm a cloud BI architecture kind of guy. I do Power BI, Azure Analysis Services, automation. I'm a team lead. We do Azure DevOps, automation things, and PowerShell. And I've been doing this for 15 plus years. I started out in what was Catman Solution in the early 2000s, and then have been moved on through consulting and other companies with focus on BI and Microsoft tools. Our recent addition to our customer stack, I guess you know one of them at least, of the Italian ones, and we're happy to welcome those guys in, as well as some of the other international companies. All right, that's enough for intro. We'll just briefly go over what will not be covered. The Power BI desktop application. It's not simply possible to view live data sets in that. And then also we will see demos on PubNub, but not the portal and internals of that. The portal is a session on its own, and it's very, they have a really neat product, PubNub, and it's a very nice user experience. So if you haven't looked into it, you should definitely do. They have a free license, so you can just go and dig in. But I will leave that out of this session and to you on your own time to dig into. All right, so Power BI offers 3 types of live data sets. What they call a push data set, a streaming data set, and then a PubNub data set. Obviously, the PubNub data set is specifically for the PubNub service. And as such, the experience to set that up is very well defined in terms of what they know what they expect from PubNub and so on. So it's a very easy setup. And that's because actually you do most of the setup in the PubNub part of this equation. So the integration with Power BI is very sleek and very easy to set up. The push and streaming datasets, we will have a demonstration on all 3, but those 2 we will see that you can actually also combine those into one dataset, which is a bit confusing to begin with, but you'll get to see the benefits of both. One thing to note is that the push dataset doesn't really automatically update with some smooth animations. Otherwise, the streaming is not storing permanently and so on. So you can have a look at this, and this is all available on Microsoft's documentation site. One thing to note is that for push datasets, if you pin an entire report using pin live page, will not result in automatic data updates. You have to pin each individual visualization in order to achieve that. So that's just a kind of gotcha up front. Push limitations. We will not be digging into the numbers. I believe this is fairly well defined and fairly it hits a broad target with 1 million rows added per hour per data set. That should be fine for most people. obviously, and that's where the enterprise comes in. Obviously, if you have an enterprise setup with hundreds, thousands of containers traveling on ships around the globe, you might want to look at something different. But we will not be dwelling on these numbers. It's just for you to have a reference on what kind of scale are these live data sets in terms of maximum number of rows and max columns and tables and so on. So the first scenario that we will be looking at is actually an Azure scenario, and this is Microsoft's vision of how all of this will feed into, in the end, Power BI. As you can see, you can also push data to a data lake, Cosmos DB, SQL, and so on, and you can kick off automation jobs based on data that comes into a stream analytics job. You can also, in that stream analytics job, push to Power BI, and that's what we're going to see in this example just in a minute. But in stream analytics, you can also tap into machine learning, which means that once the data lands in this stream, you can have machine learning algorithms applied to the data before you send it to Power BI. So that's quite nifty in here. One thing that we are, as a community, pushing Microsoft to do is actually to be able to tap into some kind of master data while you're in this session. So we'll see there are some options available, and we'll just briefly go into those. You can ingest from blobs, IoT hubs, and event hubs, and we will be using the event hub. And to my knowledge, there are no real big differences in setting up either of those. So if you know one, you know the other. And obviously applications and mobile devices and IoT devices can hook into those event hubs. What we will see is that the application that we will be monitoring with this setup is our Azure Analysis Services setup. So in our production setup, we set up a number of analysis services servers, and those tap in to an event hub. So let's go have a look at that. We will configure the event in Azure, enable diagnostics on Azure Analysis Services. We will configure the stream analytics job and have the report visible in Power BI. So I've done a little cheating up front. I already created the event hub, as you can see, and I've tested it just a couple of minutes before I went on. So that's why you see these spikes here. If we want to go look at how to set up a event hub, it's fairly simple. We get to select which subscription we want to put it in, and then which resource group do we want to have it residing in. We can create a new one if we need that. Then we decide on a namespace, and this might be taken, so I'm taking this one. And where do we want to put it? So let's see, we want it in North Europe. And there are several pricing tiers for these event hubs, and we'll just be going with a basic. And with that selection, we just enable availability zones, or we have the option to do that. We can create tags. You should, because that's how you find stuff in Azure. And then there's a review and a create process once you've set that up. So if the validation succeeded, we can create the service. But I already created that, and this is what it looks like when when you look at it. So currently there's one unit in here, and there's actually not a lot more you need to set up to get this running, because once you have this event hub, you can actually tap into that from your service. So Azure Analysis Services, as we see here, we have different or a variety of services running in our production setup. And if we just select this this one, Catman tab server 01, we browse the options menu on the left side in the service and see that there is a point called Diagnostic Services or Diagnostic Settings. And when we click that, we get to see that actually we created a diagnostic settings already, and we can see that the event hub is actually the one that I created beforehand. But allow me to edit the settings, so we can actually see that we can set up a number of things for this service, Analysis Services, and this actually goes for most of the services in Azure, so this should be fairly similar. The category details is what you want to have logged in this diagnostic setting. So we selected all metrics. That means all metrics from Azure Analysis Services. Engine and service notifications is like engine is resumed or paused, and so on, scaled, different tier, and so on. You can tap into those as well. But the metrics is number of QPUs consumed, or number of connections, and all those typical metrics for a service like this. You can send it to Log Analytics Workspace, which gives you an option to dig into the results with KQL, for example, which is the Kusto query language. You can archive it to a storage account if you want to put it in a data lake somewhere. And you can, in the end, stream it to an event hub. And I selected the event hub that I beforehand created for this. As you can see, it's 4 easy steps. You don't even have to bother with the last one for default settings. So you just have to apply which subscription you need, the namespace of the event hub, and finally the event hub name. Once that is set up, Azure Analysis Services actually puts data into the event hub. But in order to actually process that, we need to have a stream analytics job. And as with the event hub, it's fairly easy to set up a new stream analytics job. As you can see, we have to have a name for that, which subscription, and again, what resource group, what's the location, and how many streaming units. And obviously, if you want to have something more high velocity, you have to have a number of units, but we will create ours with the lowest settings. So now if I've set this up to my satisfaction, I can just hit create, and Azure will create this service for me. So let's go look at the service that was created. And now it's getting a little bit more complicated because Stream Analytics Jobs, it's actually a service that was published with, I don't know the edition, but it was a kind of an add-on for SQL Server back in the on-prem days, and you could install it on the site and actually have this kind of setup on your own machines. It's evolved into an Azure service, and with the options that you have here. So you will have some similarity with all the other services in here, but the main focus should be on this job topology. This is where you select what is the input for this stream analytics job. And I created an input, and as you can see, I called it Event Hub In. It's a stream source type, and it's sourced from an event hub. So if we click on the details, you'll see that I hooked it up for the Tabular Event Hub with the Tabular Diagnostics namespace, and all of the other settings are kind of default. Once you've settled on your input, you can, as we saw, you can add functionality to your Stream Analytics job. So you can query Azure Machine Learning Services, Azure Machine Learning Studio, and have some JavaScript user-defined functions run on your stream data. I have none configured here, and we will not go into details on that. We then define a query where this is the input, the event hub in, and as you can see, there's a little wait icon. It's because it's actually tapping into the stream, so you get examples. I can see the raw JSON that it's receiving. And I can actually test my query up here on top of this data that is just a reference sample data, so to speak, so you can validate your query. And the query language is somewhat similar to SQL, but it's not SQL. It's another another language that you need to learn if you want to go this way. As you can see, there's a slight difference from SQL, if you know SQL, that you select something into the output from the input. Then you can do some cross-apply and where clausing, and this one is also interesting because there are some options in this Stream Analytics job to actually have your data put into buckets of time windows, so to speak. So you count by second in this example, and you do it every 10 seconds, and you sample 10 seconds in a range. And then you want to calculate minimum, maximum for that period, and you output that into the select up here. So this might be a little confusing now, but there is a really good documentation on the kind of windowing functions you have in this query language, and you can go in the docs at Microsoft to look into that. I think there is a fairly good reach on all of the scenarios that you can think of in this section. You can also just push all of the data straight forward without actually aggregating it. But that can be quite much for Power BI and for you to actually consume in the other end. So in many scenarios, it's actually something that you want to aggregate data on some kind of level. That's what we do here. No more details on querying. As you can see, I select a minimum, a maximum. I also select some kind of resource ID, and then I cast the time as a date time. That's just so Power BI can manage it better. So obviously I need to create the output Power BI before I can push data into it. And the output is created by actually just connecting to the Power BI service with some credentials. In this case, I'm using a user token. I need to renew my authorization. I'm logging in as myself, and you can obviously use different means in here as well. Managed identity and user token are the options. So I created a workspace for this session in our tenant, and as you can see, there is no data set in there. So I actually have to create a data set from Azure, and Azure will create it in the workspace that I've set up here. So this will call telemetry, and we will call this service stats. So now that I save this, we can watch over here. Let's see. So successful connection test. And if we do a reload of the Power BI workspace, you should be seeing the dataset. No. Yeah, I know why. So the Event Hub is just running in the background and receiving messages as they come in. Azure Analysis Services is obviously running when you have it running, and if you pause it, it's not putting out events. But in order for the Stream Analytics job to actually crunch the data, you need to start it. There are options when you start this job. You can start it now, custom, or when last stopped. When last stopped is there's a kind of a log of events coming in. I'm not sure about how long a period they will stay there, but I'm guessing a week or something. But we will just start it now. So we will get the next messages that are sent from Azure Analysis Services. And now that Azure finds out that there is no data set in this workspace, it will create one for us. And this can perhaps take some time. And see if it has created the data set already or not. No, still not. Maybe we can look at the query meanwhile. And now, actually, something you will see is that the query can't be edited while a job is running. So in order to make any changes to the query, you need to stop the job and then make your changes and restart the job again. And that's where it comes in handy that you can actually have it go back in time and fetch the messages that were pushed before you or while you have the Stream Analytics job stopped. If we refresh, now the job is done over here. If we refresh here, we should be seeing the data set in our workspace, and there we go. We can create a report on top of that. And as you can see, there's a max, min, resource ID, and time in here. And if we do this, we can see that the messages that were in the data set actually are the ones that we see. So these 3 data points that we have in here are the ones that we see in Power BI. And if I go into Power BI in another browser and kick off some analysis on the server. So this is our Nielsen demo data we're looking into. We should be generating traffic on the analysis services server and hence getting some feedback and some points in the Stream Analytics job that we would be able to see. So now we've clicked a good number of different filters, and we should be seeing a refresh here. A single new row has come in, and if we hit refresh here, we see that it went down, and maybe the timing is off. Let me just check. Yeah, so it's an hour behind, and as you can see, the last data point that we have is 11:50. So we would be waiting a couple of minutes for the data to come in. So that's how live this actually is. And obviously, this also depends on what kind of tumbling or hopping window you put in your data here. All right. Questions for the push or the streaming data sets? These are the options that you get for the streaming data sets. You can actually create the visualizations that you are used to in here. And we will see differently with the push dataset in a second. So I'll be moving on to that. If no further questions, I will just be stopping this job to not incur any more costs. Obviously, streaming analytics job is by the event. So if it's running all night, you can. It's not that expensive, but it's still, with Azure, you have to look out for every penny. All right, that was streaming datasets. Now a push data to Power BI. We will begin by creating the dataset in the Power BI service, and we will get the URL from the Power BI service itself, and then we will have some PowerShell magic. And then we will redo all of that with historical data on. The default setting is off, and we will see that in the first shot. So let's find my Power BI setup. We want to save this, but we will create a new streaming dataset. And as you saw, we need to create an API dataset. And if you click this one, Azure Stream, you see that please head to Azure Stream Analytics to set up this. And that's what was automatically done behind the scenes for us when we set up the Stream Analytics job. For the push dataset, we need to create an API dataset, so to speak. We call this put it on, and we want to have, let's see, not this one, but this one. We want to have a timestamp in here. And there you can see the number of options that you have for data types and an attribute. So you have datetime, number, or text as data types for this kind of push data sets. And you can see in here how the payload for this endpoint should look. So you would have some kind of JSON with a timestamp in this format, value in this format. No, I don't know the English term for this. There's no quotation, but the attribute and timestamp both have quotations. And as you can see at the bottom here, historical data analysis is off to begin with. And once you hit create, it will validate the setup and create a push URL. And if we copy that, we can click done, and we see the new dataset in here. And we can head on to PowerShell and paste in the URL here in the variable that we call endpoint. And then we create a timestamp, a random number between 20 and 100. We have the attribute called Data Saturday 2021. We write out the number and we create a JSON payload for the invoke REST method. So we actually call this Power BI API endpoint with post method, and then we convert the payload to JSON and put that in the body of the request. So as you can see, we don't have the options to create a report on top of this data set. So what we have to do is actually create a dashboard. And in that dashboard, we have to set up a tile from a custom streaming data source. And you can use the telemetry dataset that we set up through the Stream Analytics job, or we can use the one we just created. Now, this is not very obvious, the yellow or white color here, that we could actually select these ones, these datasets. So there's a UI glitch here in the Power BI service, but you can select which dataset you want in here, click next, and then you get to set up a number of different visualizations. The card is obviously just showing the number, line chart, a line chart, clustered bar, column chart, as you know it, and a gauge at the end. We will look at the gauge in another example, but for this one, we'll just select the card. Then we need to just add what fields do we want to visualize, and we obviously want to visualize the value. And this is for push, and we can set a custom link to actually click on the visualization to get to a report and so on. But we will just leave that here. Power BI prompts me to create a phone view. We won't do that. And as you can see, my visualization is on screen. And if we open up the PowerShell editor, we can execute the PowerShell. And now we see 39 was written in the prompt and 39 was written in the Power BI service. Oh, that was a coincidence. 54, 71, and you can see the Power BI service picks up the number that I generate with the URL and REST method quite nicely. So, what about historic data on? We created this data set with the default settings, and if we just do this, we delete it, and we create a new streaming dataset API. Next, we call this the same. We call timestamp, and we want that date time. We want value as number and attribute as text. Now we select historic data analysis on. We create this one. It again shows and validates the JSON that you need to send. It creates a new URL, which is specific for this data set. Now we paste that in here. So the PowerShell is good to go. But what about the data set? Now, with the historical data on, you both create a push and streaming dataset. And you get the benefits of both. If you want the live dataset, you have to create a dashboard and a tile, but you could also create a report on top of the data with the traditional visualizations that you have in your Power BI service. This one and the attributes up here. We save this report like this, and we pin this to our dashboard here, and then go to our dashboard. Oh, there you go. And now we see down here should be a line chart with value and timestamp and attribute. And since we deleted the tile or the data set from before, the tile and the data goes away. So we only have this tile handy now. And we should be seeing the numbers rolling in like this. So I try to click as fast as I can, and we can see the Power BI service keeps up at some kind of refresh rate, but it's fairly quick. All right, that's the end of push and streaming and the combination of both, and we will have a little time for the PubNub dataset. We go back to our dashboard. We add a tile. We select a real-time data. Maybe I should go back to the presentation before we do this, because there are some things about the PubNub experience that I want to highlight before that. So as I said earlier on, there's a free license, 1 million transactions and 1 gigabyte of data included, and basic support. Obviously, if you want to go beyond that, there are several options for you to do that. One standard setup, and then Pro, there's a custom price. You need to talk to them about what you want to do. The free license is easy to set up, and once you have that, you can create your setup and scenario in PubNub as you want it. So there are many scenarios that they support. One publisher, one subscriber, one publisher, multiple subscribers, multiple publishers, multiple subscribers, and obviously the last one, multiple publishers and one subscriber. And that will all make sense to you once you go into the business logic of what is your application going to do and so on. But those are the options that you have available in PubNub. And for that, they've set up to demonstrate PubNub, they've set up a demo set, sensor network. It used to be very rich. They've scaled it down. I'm not sure why, but there are still values coming in from that sensor network. It used to be, I believe, 8 to 10 locations around the world where you can actually pick up on noise, humidity, temperature, and so on from the environment. But they scaled that down. We can still visualize something from the dataset, and we will do that now. So in the dashboard of your workspace, you can add a tile from a real-time data source. Next. Oh. And we will add a streaming data set, and we will select PubNub. And then you get to fill in some different options. Now, these are the demo values for this PubNub Power BI setup. So you can look that up. There is an article on both PubNub and also on the Power BI site, how to get these values. I will share that with the PowerPoint slides at the end, and also you can look them up in here. There's no authorization key needed because it's an open subscription, this one. So once I click next, the Power BI service actually taps into that PubNub output and sees that, okay, so you have radiation level, humidity, timestamp, sensor, ambient temperature, photo sensor, and that's what you get. So they've narrowed it down to some sensor unit used to be different locations, but that's what we get for this demonstration. Once I hit create, obviously a PubNub sensor network dataset is created down here. And I can then go in and add my tile from that PubNub sensor network. And we will have a look at the gauge in here and add the value of photo sensor. That's fairly busy. And let's just keep it like that. We can see it's called photo sensor, so I'll just hit apply. And now we can see that the numbers are coming in from that PubNub publishing service. This also demonstrates how lively live data can in Power BI. It's not something as with the push data set we saw before. This is a very, very fast responding data sets. All right. Time for a roundup. We have streaming data sets that we were able to set up in many of the Azure services that we see in Azure today. There is the option in the diagnostic settings to actually go in and set up a event hub as a source for the diagnostics or telemetry output from the service. And you can then move into Stream Analytics and do some wrangling of the data, maybe aggregating it a bit and then adding some machine learning if you get that far into the data to validate stuff, to detect maybe outliers or breakdown and so on. And then you can publish that into Power BI via the streaming dataset. You could also push dataset manually, so to speak. We've configured Azure DevOps to actually hook up to events on when people move tickets around or tasks, work items in there. They actually query a webhook, which then initiates a live data set being pushed or data to be pushed into a live data set in Power BI so we can monitor instantly what everyone is doing and working on and so on. Finally, there was the PubNub datasets, which is obviously a third-party offering, but it's a very well-established third party on this in this scenario, so it makes perfect sense to hook into them specifically. And the setup is mostly done in the PubNub service. So there's very little in Power BI you have to do in order to hook up to that. As you saw, we need a name. We can make up any name, and then we need two identification keys from the PubNub service, and maybe some authentication. You would probably look into that in a production setup. Once those are in there, it's actually possible to have a fairly live data set running in your Power BI tenant. As you can see, it's still going, and we can add more tiles here by custom streaming dataset, PubNub sensor network. We can have a line chart, and then we get to see the time window that we want to display, last 5 minutes. We want the timestamp. Legend would be sensor, and values would be, again, photo sensor, since it's fairly lively. We don't want to give it a name. And now you can see actually that there are several sensors reporting in, and we will see the data come in as Power BI hooks up to the output. And this obviously is a bit different than the gauge. Also because the gauge is actually listening to all events coming in. It's not, distincting, is it probe 1 or 2 or whatever. It's just receiving all of the values. Okay, so this is not actually updating. That's odd. So let's have it look up differently. Maybe we should skip this one. Yeah. And we don't want to wait 5 minutes for it to kick in. So in a minute, it will be changing the axis underneath, and then we will see data coming in. Now this one actually stopped as well. This is funny. And I have to say that sometimes during these presentations, these visualizations act a bit funny and do stuff that I don't expect, like working and then not working. Yeah, I can't really explain why that happens. Let's see if there is actually data coming in on the other data set. And this funny looking line is obviously because there was some time since the event last fired from the PowerShell script until the next one. And the line chart actually tries to connect the two dots. That's why this one looks a bit odd. But the PubNub dataset actually stopped working, which is let's try reloading the whole shebang. Nope. Okay, so the data set is still there. Ah, there we go. No? Okay, that's, well, maybe it's my browser. I don't know. Okay. We went through the different settings and also the fourth option to actually combine both push and streaming data sets with the setting historical data on. And I guess that concludes my presentation on live data sets in Power BI. So I'm ready to take any questions if there are any. Have you seen any, Marco, during the session or? Marco?
Sorry, I was in another.
Yes. Oh, okay. Yes. Any questions to wrap up?
Okay, and don't be shy. Ask anything you need. Write down on the chat or unmute you, and you can tell directly to Jens. No questions? Okay.
Okay.
Thanks, Jens. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Hope to have you again, at least in presence next year. We hope.
Yes, we hope so. We hope so. No, but
Okay.
this is my second trip to Italy virtually in a week. So last Friday it was the Global Power BI Power Platform Bootcamp. So this is well in 8 days. It's my second trip to Italy. I will happily do that